We're on Vav Amud Aleph, and we're in the middle of a sugya dealing with a dialogue between Reish Lakish and Rebbe Lazar. Their dialogue was, Reish Lakish had difficulty understanding this whole concept that if a korbanish is shechted shelo lishma, it's still kosher, but it's not miratzeh. It doesn't fulfill the bringer's obligation. So the Gemara went back and forth, and one of the arguments was that a korban doesn't work for the heirs. It doesn't work la'achar misa, which means, in other words, the heirs can't use the korban for their own atonement. If, let's say, their mother passes away and she had set aside a korban for childbirth, it doesn't work for the heirs. The heirs can't use it. And the Gemara had worked under the assumption that they don't own the korban, and the reason why that's the reason why the korban cannot atone for any of their sins, right? So the Gemara said, but how can you tell me that? The Gemara had said, how can you tell me that they don't own the korban? Because the Brisa had said that they can't make the heirs of if you have two heirs, let's say you have two sons of a decedent, they do not have the ability to make an animal that their father left them as a korban, a tamura animal, to transfer its kedusha onto animal B. And the reason is because they are shutfin. But the Gemara says, if they're not the owners, why are they shutfin? So the Gemara, they're not the owner of the animal. And if you're telling me that indeed normally an heir can make tamura, it's just that they can't because they're shutfin, but they don't own the animal. So the Gemara had answered, in reality, they don't own the animal. And the reason why two heirs cannot create the tamura situation is based on a special gzeres hakasuv of imhamer yamer. The Torah uses a double language, and it says that basically whatever applies to the original owner applies to the heir as well. The heir has the ability to make the animal tamura even though he doesn't own it, but just like the original owner can only make an animal, can transfer tamura power over to another animal if the animal is singularly owned, not owned by a corporation, so too the heirs also must be a singular person. If it's more than one person, they don't have the opportunity to make tamura. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. If you're working based on the double language of imhamer yamer, then let me ask you a question. This is the fourth line on Daf Vav. So maskef lo Rav Yaakov minahar pekod, ela me'ata gabi meiser, dichsiv ve'im go'ol yigaal, lerabos es hayoresh, hachinami echad goyel ve'in shnaim goyelin. There's a law by Meiser Sheni that if a person is going to redeem a Meiser Sheni, he adds a chomesh, he adds 25%, and then to the redemption value, and he brings the cash up to Yerushalayim. So the halacha is that this idea of a yoresh also, did I get that right? That if an heir wants to convert the produce into cash, he also has to add a chomesh. Now, are you going to say that double language also implies that only if there's one heir, he has to add the chomesh, but if there's two heirs, the law does not apply to him because of that double language, just like it said by Hamer Yamir? So the Gemara answered, no. Shiny meiser de gabi avu hanami isei b'shutfis. No. What we were doing with that double language by tamura was basically using the transitive property. Whatever qualities, whatever characteristics apply to the father, who's the original owner, apply to the heirs. Just like by the father, if the animal is jointly owned, he cannot use it as a tamura animal. The same thing applies to the heirs. But in the case of Meiser Sheni, there's no such restriction that if I own produce in partnership with somebody else, that I can't be poda it onto cash. So therefore, whatever applies, whatever works for the father, works for the heirs. So the heirs too, if there are multiple heirs, they too will have this law of redemption applied to them. And therefore, if they want to redeem it onto cash, they can, but they have to be Mosif Chomesh. Let us go weiter. Now we're going into a slightly different question. Amrle Ravasi l'Ravashi. I'm sorry. We're still continuing. Amrle Ravasi l'Ravashi umina iomart bishla makan yeluhu hainu dechad miha meimar ella iomart lo kan yeluhu hechi meimar. But let me go back to a basic question. Let's go back to the Tumura issue. You just got through telling me that the heirs do not acquire the animal of their father. All they have is an obligation to bring the animal, but they don't become the owners of the animal. And yet you agree that an heir can make the animal Tumura. How can that be? How can they transfer the Kedusha of that animal if it doesn't belong to them? Normally that only works for the owner. Because V'ha'amar Rabbi Avohu Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hamakdish Mosif Chomish Umiskaper Osa Tumura. That the person who declares the animal to be hektish is the one who has to add a chomish. Now what this halacha means is this, it's very simple halacha. If Reuven says, you know what, I need to bring an animal as a korban, and Shimon says, you're my beloved friend, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take an animal from my herd and I'll let you use that animal. Then all of a sudden that animal develops a blemish and it needs to be redeemed and exchanged onto cash so we can purchase another animal that doesn't have a blemish. So the halacha is you have to normally add a chomesh, you have to add 25% to the cash value when you do that redemption. But only the person who made it hektish, not the person who the korban is meant for. So if Reuven is the one who wants to redeem the animal, since he was not the one who declared it to be hektish originally, he does not have to be mosif chomesh. It's only if Shimon wants to redeem it, then he's the one who has to be mosif chomesh. Umiskaper osa tumura, and furthermore, the only person who has the ability to transfer the kedusha from animal A to animal B, which is what tumura means, is the person who is receiving atonement through animal A. But if the person who is trying to do the tumura is not receiving atonement through that animal, his declaration doesn't work. Now let's be clear. If the children do not own the animal, there's no way that they're receiving any level of atonement. It's not their animal. It's not their korban. They're just bringing it on behalf of their deceased father. So how can you tell me that they have the ability to make tumura? You just showed me from the pasuk that an heir can make tumura, but how does it work if they're not receiving any atonement from the animal? And the third halacha of this statement from Rabbi Yochanan was that when you have two parties, one who is the owner of the produce, that is tevel, that is untithed. Let's say Reuven's field, he's got a whole bunch of produce, he has to still take truma. And Shimon, his friend, says, you know what, Reuven, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to take from my produce, and it'll serve as truma for yours, for your field, so your field will no longer be tevel. The halacha is that even though it's really done for Reuven's field, but Shimon still has rights in that truma produce. What rights does he have? He can decide which kohen to give that truma to. That zuchus, that privilege is his. And so, but the point is, from Tumura, it's the heirs, you say it's not their korban, they're not getting kapara, so how does it work that they can create Tumura? So the Gemara answers, and it's a very strange answer, Mekiva lo mechapra, mekufya mechapra. And the way that Rashi translates these words, kiva means it's fixed and embedded, and kufya means it's floating. So I'm going to tell you the concept, but I want to just give a short introduction to the concept. In case you hadn't noticed, we're learning kudshim. I say that just to jar you to the reality of the endeavor, because kudshim, by definition, is an entirely different realm of Talmud-Torah, different from the rest of Shas. Part of the difference of it is that it examines a realm of halacha that is completely outside our purview of experience. That's number one. But that's true by Taharos as well. But the second thing that makes Kudshim exceptional is that there are many halachos that apply to sacrificial animals that don't apply to anything, to any other. You can't maybe exchange the same halachic principles that you find in Kudshim and apply them to other places. And the Gemara says that in many places in Shas. We're going to see many kinds of abstract distinctions that the Gemara makes that seem like they're splitting hairs. that we wouldn't normally find in other places in Shas. And this is one of those examples. And that's really why I want to sort of bring that to your attention, that this is a unique kind of hair splitting that you find in Kutshim. Here's the unique kind of hair splitting in this example. The Gemara says, while it's true that the heirs do not become the owner, so that they cannot receive a deeply embedded kind of kapara for this animal, but they achieve a floating kapara, which is the Gemara's way of saying that there's some aspect of spiritual benefit to the heirs by bringing their father's korban. The animal does not belong to them, but they're achieving something that connects to them on some spiritual plane, and that connection or that level of alleviation of sin that is accomplished through their bringing of their father's korban is enough to allow them to affect Tamura. Okay? It's a hair splitting. Mm-hmm. And there's no other way that I can explain it. Just to say that it's theirs and it's not theirs. It's not theirs because it's not their property, and therefore they're not shutfin in an animal. Right. But on the other hand, it's theirs to the point where they achieve some level of kapara that's floating in the air, but not embedded. That's the way the Gemara explains it. Okay.
Maybe a tzedek ben tzedek is a little higher. It does get some derivation.
Okay. However you'd like to explain it. Now we're going to see another interesting kind of abstract discussion, but I think you'll find this very interesting because you'll see now that the Gemara really is focusing on the atoning power, the sort of the spiritual purging power of karbanos. Iboyelahu kipro alma shabo olo kipro, or lo kipru. The Gemara's question is as follows. Going back to our Mishnah, the Mishnah had said that if the korban was shechted shelo lishma, for the wrong purpose or for the wrong person, the korban is still kosher, but it's not miratzeh. The question that the Gemara now asks is, okay, you brought the wrong korban. The Kohen comes out of the room after the korban is brought. He says, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is your korban was brought and it's a kosher korban. What's the bad news? I shechted it for the wrong reason. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to bring another one. So now the question is, in that interim period before the guy brings his second animal, has he achieved atonement for his sins or not? Now remember, what we're talking about is a person who's bringing a voluntary korban, bringing a korban ola. Why would a person bring a voluntary korban ola? So Rashi had told us that a korban ola is mechaper for a mitzvah saseh. I didn't do what I was supposed. I forgot to shake lulav. Oy vey. I forgot to shake lulav. I didn't say hallel. Whatever. Okay. But I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and I want to somehow atone for it. It is at your discretion to bring a korban ola whenever you like, if you feel you need to purge from various different relatively minor sins that you've committed. So the question now is, I've been sittering to bring this korban because I feel like I got schmutz in my neshama. The Kohen comes out and tells me the bad news that it was shelo lishma. Can I consider myself nevertheless purged on a spiritual plane? Or does my purging not take place until I bring the second korban? And what's the nafkamina? Rashi says, do I have to worry about yisurim or not? Do I have to worry that God is going to strike me down or not because I haven't purged my neshama yet? It's an interesting abstract question, but you see the Gemara is concerned about it, right? So the Gemara says like this. So Amar Rav Shisha Berei de Ravidi Mistavra de lo Kipru. The Isal Kadaitach Kipru Sheni Lama Huba. See, he says, listen, it's got to be that the first korban doesn't accomplish that, because if it did, then why bring a second one? So the Gemara responds, I don't understand you, Rav Shisha. The Elamai Lo Kipru Lama Hu Karev. Well, if you're going to tell me that it doesn't accomplish anything, then why are you bringing it as a korban? What's it coming for? So Amar Rav Shishi Berei de Rav Idi Hachi Kakashile. Iomart Bishlama Lo Kipru Shelo Lishmo Mikoach Lishmo Kaasi. V'sheni Lama Huba L'chaper. Ela Iomart Kipru Sheni Lama Huba. So let me explain to you Rav Shisha's reasoning. He says, if you're going to tell me that the first korban has no kapara value whatsoever, I can understand why you bring the second korban, and I can even understand why you bring the first korban, because Lamaisa, the guy had designated that animal as his korban. So you might as well bring it, and you'll have to just bring a second animal as well. But if the first animal provides kapara, even though it was done shalol lishma, then there's bichlal no reason to bring a second animal, because it was purely an optional korban to begin with. He was only bringing it in order to get purged spiritually. If he got the purging, then he doesn't need a second korban. He'll just say, listen, thanks, but no thanks. I've accomplished what I set out to do. So therefore, Rav Shisha's argument stands, and therefore, if the Kohen comes out and he says, I got good news and bad news, then you should still tziter. And you're going to have to worry about Yisurim until you bring your second animal.
When we say that in the situations where the korban was good, but it didn't affect the intention, what do you mean by the word good? I mean,
Korban is kosher, which means you go through with the procedure of sprinkling its blood on the altar.
I understand. It didn't accomplish anything.
It does not accomplish anything for that person, but it is still an accepted sacrifice before God. God says, place it on the altar. I desire it. It's a form of worship, but it does not accomplish the desired effect of purging that individual soul.
It almost sounds like you're saying in our day, you're saying a prayer and you didn't accomplish it.
Well, that's the whole point. You see, karbanos are somewhat different from prayer. If you recall, there's communal karbanos, and there's a korban tamid that's brought every morning and every afternoon. We don't have that type of, or maybe you could argue we do have with chazaras hashatz, but we really don't have a communal prayer that is done without the consciousness of the entire Jewish people. We don't have such a phenomenon. So you see that karbanos are different on some level from prayer, even communal prayer, because communal prayer, at least, we're doing it, we're participating in it. A korban tamid doesn't really have any, there's something called a maimed, and they're participating in some way, but it's a very abstract connection. So, and we have this thing called the kayetz hamizbeach, that whenever there's downtime and you have extra animals, you can put them on the altar. God says, do that, I want that. Why is that for? It's not accomplishing anything specific. You see that the whole concept of karbanos is, God says, as long as the animal's kosher, as long as the avoda is kosher, then it's something that I desire, and it helps on some metaphysical level. We're not going to have so much time today, so let us move forward. Ibayaluhu. The next question is raised. Ibayaluhu. Aase delachar hafrasha mechapra olo mechapra. Mi amrinan midi dehava achatas machatas dekodem hafrasha im delachar hafrasha lo afacha nami dekodem hafrasha in lachar hafrasha lo odilma lo dami lachatas dechatas al kol chet v'chet boili suye chad achatas v'hacha keven dika kama ase gabe michapra aase delachar hafrasha nami michapra. Long question, but it's very simple. The question the Gemara asks is like this. I've done a series of mitzvahs aseh that I violated. I forgot to shake lulav the third day of Sukkot. I forgot to say a bracha. I forgot to bench one day, right? Like I've been making this list. I got a notepad by my bedside, all the things I got to be machaper for. So I come to the Beis HaMikdash, I'm bringing my olah. Now, I've designated an animal that I plan to bring to the temple. The day after I designate the animal, I forgot to bench again. Okay? Forgot to say Kriya Shema, whatever I forgot to do. Right? Can I add it on? Does it count? Or do you say that once you've designated the animal, it only covers stuff up until then, and if you want to atone for other things that come afterwards, you got to bring a separate animal. So the Gemara deliberates. On the one hand, it could be like a korban chatas. A korban chatas only works once you designate the chatas animal. You can't add on other sins. On the same thing over here. But on the other hand, maybe it's dissimilar to chatas, because for a korban chatas, you can't have multiple sins work with one animal. If I'm mechalel Shabbos 3 times, I got to bring 3 korbanos chatas. But in this situation, I can have compound sins work for one animal because they're all mitzvahs aseh. They're relatively minor. And therefore, maybe, just like I can use compound sins we'll use one animal, maybe I can add on sins that I did even after I was mafresh, I set aside the animal. So do the sins that I did after hafrasha, can they be counted with this animal or not? That's the question of the Gemara. So Tashma, so come and listen. V'samach v'nirtza lo lechaper alav. So the Torah says in one pasuk that the bringer of the korban shall press down on the animal, and he shall receive atonement from Hashem. V'chismicha mechaperes v'halo ein kapora ela bedam shnemar ki adamu hanefesh yichaper. What does the pasuk mean? It seems from the pasuk that by pressing down on the animal I receive atonement, but that's not true. We know that the only way that I receive atonement is if the blood of the animal is sprinkled on the altar. That's what affects atonement. So, ela matamu lomer v'samach v'nirtza lechaper, she'im asa l'smicha shiyorei mitzvah, ma'ale alav hakasav ki'ilo lo keep v'keeper. So it teaches me as follows, that if I treat pressing down on the animal in a trifling way, as if it's unimportant, and I therefore decide I'm not going to press down on the animal, then I have nevertheless fulfilled the mitzvah, but Scripture attributes it as if I've atoned, but I have not atoned. So that language is strange. What does it mean, I've atoned, but I've not atoned? So my love, de kiper ase de kodem hafrasha, lo kiper ase de smicha, de havale ase de la'achar hafrasha. What it seems to mean is that by not doing smicha, by not pressing down on the animal, I've violated a mitzvah saseh. And the reason why I cannot get atonement for that sin from this animal is because the sin was committed after I had already designated the animal. So doesn't that prove my point? The point is that any sin that's committed after the hafrasha cannot be appended to this animal for atonement.
So, the smicha is transmitting the sin from the person to the animal. That's
what its metaphysical intent is, right? That's for sure what the intention is. But we're talking here that a guy chooses not to do it, but it's not ma'akev. Smicha is not ma'akev. You still get kapara even if you didn't do smicha, right? So, but what we want to try and prove from here is that the fact is, since I had already separated the animal, designated the animal, the sin that I do afterwards by not doing smicha cannot be appended to this animal. So Amar Rava, no, ase de smicha kamar, shiny hasam dechol kama de lo shachid ba'amodu smoch koi, emas kahavi ase la'achar shchita lo kami boyalon. So the Gemara answers no. He says, think about it for a second. At what point do I violate the prohibition of not doing smicha? At what point do I violate the mitzvah's aseh of not doing smicha? Only at such point where I can no longer do smicha. Look, if the Torah says press down on the animal, and I initially tell the Kohen, you know what, I'm not interested, I don't like touching animals. I'm not interested in pressing down on this animal. I don't need it. 5 minutes later, I changed my mind and I do smicha right before he shechts the animal. Did I violate a mitzvah aseh? No, didn't violate mitzvah. Because as long as I can still do smicha, I can always repair my initial decision. So at what point have I violated the mitzvah aseh? When it's no longer possible to do smicha because the animal is now dead. When does that happen? After shchita. After shchita, everyone would agree. That's not even part of my question. That for sure I agree, that once you shecht the animal, you can't, and then you do a sin after you shecht the animal, then we agree that you can't append that to the already shechted animal. That's the reason why you don't receive atonement for the violation of smicha, because the violation is only incurred after shechita. But my question is, what if the animal is still alive and I sin? Can I append that sin onto the animal or not? So Amarle Rav Huna bar Yehuda l'Rava, Ema kiper gavra, lo kiper kamei shemaya. So before we continue along this deliberation, let's go back to the statement that said that if you choose not to do smicha, you're lo kiper v'kiper. It's as if you didn't get atonement, but you got atonement. So we thought what it meant is that you don't get atonement for the violation of not doing smicha. But maybe it means something else. Maybe it means that you can get atonement for not doing smicha, but what it means is that you did the minimum of the mitzvah, but you didn't give nachas to the Ribbono Shel Olam because you didn't do the mitzvah properly. In other words, it's got nothing to do with the technical issue of whether the sin of smicha is atoned for or not, but all it means is that when a person does a mitzvah in a less than optimal way, Hashem says, you know what? You did the magic, so I got to respond. You know, you said the magic words, you said the secret void, so I have to respond and I have to offer you atonement. But I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy because you did it in a less than proper way. And that's what it means, kiper velo kiper. It means, okay, showing, I'm moichel, right? But I'm not happy to have to be moichel you, right? That's what it means, kiper velo kiper, right? Milo tnan v'hanosar b'shemen asher al kaf hakohen yitein al rosh hamitaher v'chiper alav hakohen lifnei Hashem. So there's a pasuk that talks about, we're going to read it this Shabbos in Parshas Tazria Mitzorah. The Torah says that when a Mitzorah wants to atone for, or wants to purify himself from his tsaras, so he has to go through a procedure of bringing a sacrificial service, takes the blood and does service with it, and then he takes oil and he places it on the ear of the Mitzorah and on the toe of the big toe of the Mitzorah and the big thumb and the thumb of the Mitzorah. And then the Torah says, whatever is left of the oil that's in the Kohen's hands, he shall place on the head of the Mitzorah. He shall place on the head of the Mitzorah. What would happen if the Mitzorah says, I don't want that stuff on my head. I don't want oily hair. So therefore, that's what the Brisa addresses. Im nasan kiper, v'im lo nasan lo kiper, diver Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva holds, you got to put the oil on his head. You don't put the oil on his head, everything is puzzle, and you got to start all over again. The whole atonement process is no good. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer shiori mitzvahein bein nitan bein shelo nitan kiper umalan alav ki'ilu lo kiper. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says no, it's not ma'akev, it's not absolutely necessary. If you didn't put the oil on his head, the guy refuses to let the oil be placed on his head, he's received atonement, but it's as if he hasn't received atonement. So what does that mean? My ki'ilu lo kiper, he says it can't mean that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri advocates to start all over again because that's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, regardless of whether you put the oil on his head, he gets purification. Ela kiper gavra lo kiper kamei shamaya. Hachanami kiper gavra lo kiper kamei shamaya. So rather what we're suggesting, says the Gemara, is that it means over there that you've done the protocol that you need in order to receive purification, but Hashem's unhappy because, you refused the oil on your head. You didn't do it the right way. So maybe that's all it means over here, by the law of smicha. You didn't do smicha, so Hashem says, you're yotzei, but I'm not happy. So the Gemara says, no. Hasamnami kiper matan bahonos lo kiper matnos harosh. It could be that also is not necessarily. It could be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri means is the technical issue of which mitzvahs have you atoned for and which mitzvahs have you not atoned for. Just like we were suggesting by smicha, you've atoned for all of the sins that you committed, which is why you brought the korban, but you did not atone for the sin of not doing smicha. In similar vein, maybe that's what it means over here. You atoned for your tsaras, but you didn't atone for the sin of refusing to have the oil placed on your head. So maybe that's what it means there also. So this distinction that you're drawing on a metaphysical level, that you were yotzei, but Hashem is unhappy with you, is not necessarily a correct distinction to draw. Tashma, but we're still in the middle of our question, which is, if I sin after the hafrasha, can I append that sin to the animal or not? So Tashma, Reb Shimon Omer, kivsei atzeres lamahin boim. So Reb Shimon is quoted in the Brisa as saying, why do we bring the sheep on Shavuos? The Torah says, bring 2 sheep on Shavuos. And the Brisa's question is, what are they coming to atone for? So the Gemara interjects and says, Kivsei atzeres shlamim ninu. What kind of question is that? It's not a sin offering, it's a shlamim offering. So what kind of question are you asking? What is it coming to atone for? Ela si'irei atzeres lamahin boim. But the question really is not on the sheep, but on the goats. Now Rashi just tells us a little background. He tells us that even though it's not explicit that there are two goats, because there's one pasuk in one place that says bring a goat, and there's another pasuk in another place that says bring a goat, and the Gemara, based on Torah, based on a Masorah, tells us that these two goats are two different goats. And from Torah Shabbal Peh, we derive that you have to bring two different goats as a sin offering on Shavuos. What's the point of bringing two goats? What is it coming to atone for? Al tumas mikdash v'kadashav. It's coming to atone for defiling the temple and its accoutrements. Now, the issue is, invariably, someone will walk into the Beis HaMikdash in a state of tumah, and that requires atonement. So, on a communal level, we bring these goats on Shavuos, and as it turns out, according to Rashi, it's done every Shalosh Regalim. You bring two goats to atone 3 times a year for an accumulation of sin of people who have defiled the temple with their tumah. So Nizrak Damo Shel Rishon Sheni Lama Karev Al Tumah She'ura'a Ben Zelazeh. And more me'ata ru'uyin ha'yu Yisrael lahakriv karbonosein b'chol esu b'chol sha'a ela shechisei chakasuv. And Reb Shimon says, well then let's think about it. Why then do you need 2 goats? Once you sprinkle the blood of the first goat, what's the point of bringing the second goat? You've already received atonement. And the answer is because the interval between bringing the first goat and the second goat, there may have been someone during that interval of a few minutes who walked into the Beis HaMikdash when he was Tameh, and that too requires atonement. And it's teaching me a very important moral lesson, which is really there should be on a continual basis, every 10 minutes, the Beis HaMikdash should be bringing another goat to atone for someone out of the thousands of people who are constantly in and out of the temple. Someone invariably is Tameh and just didn't want to tell anybody. So we constantly need to atone. But Hashem was worried about the financial drain on the economy, and therefore he said, just bring 2 every Shalosh Regalim. And that's sufficient to atone for the accumulated tumah over the course of the year. So the Gemara now says, what do we want to prove from here? V'hahacha da ase de la'achar hafrasha v'kam mechapra. So look, what are we talking about? When were the animals declared to be sacrificial goats? Erev Yantif. You got to set aside the korban before Yantif. They were set aside, and you're telling me that there's atonement possible for those who defiled the temple during that interval on Shavuos between the first goat and the second goat. That's clearly a sin committed after the hafrasha. So doesn't that prove our point that a sin committed after hafrasha, before the animal is brought, can be appended to that animal? Isn't that the proof? So the Gemara says, Ida afreshinu bevas achas achanami. Hacha b'mayaskinan da afreshinu bazeh achar zeh. So the Gemara answers like this. The only reason why the Torah would require you to bring 2 goats is only for a scenario where you didn't designate the 2 goats on Erev Yantif simultaneously, because really in reality I'll argue that once the animal has been designated, any sin committed after that cannot be appended to that animal. So really, what are we talking about? A Kohen went ahead and designated goat A, and he waited 5 minutes. And during that 5-minute interval, someone else defiled the temple, and then he designated goat B. That's the reason. For in a situation where a Kohen did not designate them simultaneously, but only designated them one after the other, the animal B atones for the sins committed between the designation of animal A and the designation of animal B. And the Gemara says that's very bizarre. It says, V'leiku v'leimulei l'kra d'chiksiva b'zeh achar zeh ksiva. So 1 second. You mean to tell me that the Torah only requires 2 goats because a Kohen may have designated the animal separately? Does that really make any sense? Just tell the Kohen, designate the animals together, and all you need is 1 goat. I mean, it just sounds nonsensical to say that the Torah is concerned about 2 goats in the event that the Kohen designates the goat A and goat B separately, sequentially instead of simultaneously. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Papa, Karbonos Tzibor Karmart. Shiny Karbonos Tzibor Delev based in Kamasna Aleihen. So the Gemara says, okay, you got me. But in reality, I will argue that once a sin is committed after hafrasha, it cannot be appended to the animal. Why then do we need to bring a second goat? Because just because a Kohen designates an animal on Erev Yantiv as a korban, it's not within his authority to make that animal now separated for a korban. The truth is, in halacha, when it comes to communal sacrifices, that's different from an individual korban. When an individual sets aside an animal for a korban, it immediately becomes holy and secluded for that purpose. But when a Kohen designates it on behalf of the community, Beis Din says that designation will be held in abeyance until right before Shechita. Just in case, for whatever reason, we don't need that animal. We don't want it to be precluded for Kedusha in the event that something happens and we don't end up using that animal. It shouldn't have to have a stigma of being Kadosh. Beis Din has that authority to do that. And how do we know that? Kid Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Dam Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Karbanos Tzibor Sakin Moshchasan, Lama Shehein. That according to Shmuel, the knife of the Shechita is the thing that designates the animal. In other words, Beis Din basically says, we know that this animal was designated as a korban tamid, for example, but it does not have the kedusha of a sacrificial animal until the very moment, the second before Shechita. Okay? And that's the reason why the guy will go ahead and he'll shecht goat A. Goat B has not even yet had its hafrasha yet, technically, because Beis Din it says hold it in abeyance. And that's the reason why if a person commits a sin between goat A and goat B, on Shavuos, he can get atonement through goat B. Okay. Amar le Rav Yosef bereder Rav Shmuel Rav Papa. Umi isle le Rabbi Shimon leiv Beis Din masna alein. But wait a minute. Who are you saying this in the name of? You're saying this in the name of Rabbi Shimon, who's the author of the brisa that we just saw, that the reason for 2 goats is to atone for those who defiled the temple in between goat A and goat B. Why? Because Beis Din holds goat B in abeyance? Reb Shimon doesn't hold that Beis Din can do that, and I'll prove it to you. Because v'ha'amar Rav Idi bar Abin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan, Temidin shlohutzruchu letzibor, ledivrei Reb Shimon a niftin temimim, ledivrei chachamim niftin temimim. He says, there's a basic machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim as follows. We know that when you purchase the korban tamid, where does the money come from to purchase the korban tamid? It comes from the machatzis hashekel that people donate, and the new funds start on the 1st of Nisan. Let's say we purchased a bunch of animals for the korban tamid, and we realize that we have too many animals. Can we just, and now it's the 1st of Nisan, can we just use last year's animals for this year? So the Chachamim say, yes, you can. You know why? Because Leiv Beis Din Masna Aleim. They weren't designated as holy animals for last year's karbanos. Beis Din held their kedusha in abeyance until they would actually be needed. So therefore, they're considered to be chulin, and therefore transfer them over for the new year, perfectly fine. But Reb Shimon says you can't do that. Because once they've been set aside for karbanos, I don't hold of Leif Beis Din Masna. I don't hold that Beis Din can hold that kedusha in abeyance. They're sanctified for last year, and you can't use them for this year unless you go through a whole redemption process. So therefore, you see that Reb Shimon doesn't hold of Leif Beis Din Masna, that Beis Din holds their kedusha in abeyance. Okay, so that's a problem that we have in general. How you can, if you're trying to explain the brisa by saying that sins that are committed after the hafrasha cannot be appended to the animal, that's not going to seem to fit into Reb Shimon's brisa. Now, ba'amine Reb Yirmi, so va'od, and let me ask you another challenge. Ha'ba'amine Reb Yirmi Reb Zera, si'irei atzera shekibel damam b'shnei kosos v'nizrak damo shel rishon sheni lama huba al tuma shu'ura ben zrika shel zelazeh. So the question that he asked was, if let's say you shechted goat A and goat B on Shavuos, and you received their blood in 2 separate receptacles, after receiving the blood of goat A, why do you need to receive the blood of goat B? Haven't you already achieved atonement with goat A for all of the Tumas Mikdash? Why do you need goat B? And the answer that was given was, just in case somebody sinned between the sprinkling of the blood of goat A and the sprinkling of the blood of goat B. And ad kan lo mibayale ella asay de la'achar shchita, aval asay de la'achar hafrasha lo komi bayale. And it seems like the only question that is on the table in this conversation is, if a person sinned after the shchita of goat A, can he receive atonement or not? But everyone seems to, from that whole discussion, it seems like before the animal was shechted, even though the animal was designated, if a person would sin, he could certainly append that sin onto the separated or designated animal. So it seems from this discussion that after hafrasha could certainly be appended the sin. The sin could certainly be appended to the animal. So why are you even trying to prove anything to the contrary from this whole discussion of Reb Shimon? So the Gemara answers, no. Dilma imtim salomar ka'amar. Maybe when Rabbi Yirmiyah was having this conversation, he was including a couple of different possibilities in that question. Maybe his question really meant was, at what point does the person's sin no longer have the ability to be appended to the animal? It could be once there was hafrasha, and if you're going to argue that even after hafrasha his sin could be appended, what about after shchita? That could be what his question was, and therefore we really have no resolution. At the end of the day, Rashi says, we don't have an answer to this question. If a person sins after the animal had hafrasha, can those new sins be appended to this korban? No answer. We're going to hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day. Sorry.